The Man Who Tamed Time. The Man Who Tamed Time. Part 1. The Boy Who Watched Rivers. Prologue. The breath before the brushstroke. Hey guys, tonight we begin with a man who tried to measure eternity with paint and paper. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan, or let the window stay open just a little so you can hear the air moving. Take a slow breath in, let it out. Somewhere between that inhale and exhale, Leonardo da Vinci once said, "Life's the secret rhythm of the world." He believed that everything, even air, had geometry, that the flight of birds, the curve of a smile, and the turning of planets followed one quiet equation. He never solved it, but he never stopped trying. This is the story of a man who spent a lifetime chasing perfection, not to control it, but to understand it. Chapter 1. The Child in the Valley of Water. Before the name Da Vinci meant genius, it meant geography. He was Leonardo from the valley near the river Vinci, a village caught between mountains and mist. He was born illegitimate, the child of a notary and a peasant woman. That single circumstance placed him forever outside the narrow definitions of status. He could observe society without belonging to it. He would always be the watcher. As a boy, Leonardo wandered the fields more than he stayed indoors. He stared at dragonflies, trying to count how many times their wings moved in a heartbeat. He watched water curl around stones and noticed that no two swirls were ever the same. He filled scraps of paper with sketches of streams, of plants, of the faces of neighbors glimpsed in candlelight. Each drawing carried a question. How does motion become form? How does form hold motion? When other children were taught prayers, he learned observation. His grandfather scolded him for bringing home frogs and dismantling clocks. His mother laughed, telling him that even God would forgive curiosity that came without malice. He drew until the light failed and the ink froze on the quill. Even then, he would trace lines in the air with his finger, memorizing patterns that the dark would hide. In his notebooks, written backward so only a mirror could read them, he later recalled those days. "The water teaches me the language of time." He would spend his life translating that language. Chapter 2. Apprentice of Light. Florence was the furnace of art in the 15th century. The air itself smelled of pigment and ambition. Young Leonardo arrived barefoot with a portfolio of sketches and the unshakable stare of someone who saw more than he spoke. He became an apprentice in the workshop of Andrea del Verrocchio, master sculptor and painter. There he learned to grind colors, to mix egg yolk with tempera, to stretch canvas, to study anatomy from the cold precision of cadavers. Verrocchio saw in him both diligence and danger. The boy's lines were too perfect, his patience unsettling. When they worked together on the baptism of Christ, Verrocchio painted the main figures and asked Leonardo to add an angel at the edge of the composition. When the painting was finished, Verrocchio looked and said nothing for a long time. Leonardo's angel shimmered, softer, truer, alive. The master, legend says, put down his brush and declared he would never paint again. That story might be myth, but it carries truth. Leonardo's fire was not competition, it was precision beyond comfort. Even his mentors felt time tilt when he entered the room. Yet for all his brilliance, Leonardo rarely finished what he began. The same perfection that elevated him also anchored him. He saw the flaw in every line. When asked why he delayed, he answered, "I am still learning how to see." Chapter 3: The Map of Air. Between commissions, Leonardo filled notebooks with drawings of storms, of whirlpools, of machines that might fly. He wrote notes backward because privacy allowed imperfection. He dissected birds to understand lift, measured water in jars to capture turbulence. To him, every pattern was a clue in the grand architecture of motion. In the margins of one notebook, he scribbled, "Time stays long enough for those who use it." It sounds like arrogance, but it was confession. He could not keep up with the clock he chased. When the Medici family's favor cooled, he sought patrons in Milan. He arrived carrying sketches of bridges, weapons, and flying machines. To the Duke, he presented himself not as painter, but engineer, because the world respected war more than wonder. He promised devices that could defend the city. He delivered art instead. He painted the Last Supper. The paint cracked within years because he mixed the medium wrong, trying to slow drying time, to stretch a moment across eternity. He learned that perfection resists permanence. Monk. Chapter 4: The Anatomy of Delay. Leonardo's notebooks grew heavier than his completed works. 13,000 pages of inventions, diagrams, philosophies. Few ever built, few ever seen. He would start a painting, obsess over a shadow, and abandon it when the light changed. Apprentices whispered that he was cursed by genius. Patrons grumbled that he was unreliable. He smiled politely and said nothing. He understood that his perfectionism was a cage made of mirrors. Every reflection showed something still wrong. Yet he could not break it. To him, the incomplete was honest. The finished was a lie told to time. He wrote, "Art is never finished, only abandoned." That line is both excuse and wisdom, the anthem of those who live between inspiration and exhaustion. Chapter 5: The Fire Within the Clock. As years passed, his obsessions multiplied. The geometry of leaves, the anatomy of horses, the optics of the human eye. He built automata that walked, organs that played themselves, sketches of helicopters centuries early. Friends worried for him. He smiled and said, "I must understand motion, or else I cannot understand life." He saw time not as an enemy, but as collaborator. He aged deliberately, testing what endurance could teach perception. When asked about God, he said, "Nature is full of infinite reasons which have never been experienced." He believed creation itself was a clockwork so intricate that only wonder could tell its time. Book Chapter 6. The River and the Mirror. In his final years, he returned to the landscapes of his youth. He wrote of rivers again, of their curves and currents. He described them as veins of the earth, carrying memory from mountain to sea. He no longer raced them, he simply watched. At 67, he moved to France at the invitation of King Francis I. There, in a small house called Clos Lucé, he organized his papers, drew machines that could lift stone, and painted slow sketches of water. He carried a notebook even to bed. When asked why he still worked, he said, "Because the day is not done." The king adored him. They would walk the gardens together, the monarch asking about stars and flight, Leonardo answering like a father who finally found a listener. One morning his hand trembled too much to draw. He looked at the blank page and smiled. "The spirit cannot stop observing," he whispered. Then he rested his pen. He had not tamed time. He had translated it, from motion into meaning, from second into sight. Oh, epilogue, the unfinished line. Leonardo left behind half-complete paintings, unread notes and ideas that would take centuries to bloom. He also left behind a sentence written in his mirror script. As a day well spent brings happy sleep, so a life well used brings happy death. He did not conquer time, he harmonized with it, and that perhaps is perfection. Close your eyes. Let the river move beneath you. You don't have to finish everything tonight. You only have to keep observing. End of Part 1. The Boy Who Watched Rivers. The Man Who Tamed Time. Part 2. The Apprentice of Light. Kikar. Prologue. The Studio of Sunlight. Florence. 1466. The morning spills gold across cobblestones. Bells echo through alleys that smell of bread and pigment. The city hums with commerce and creation. Sculptors shaping marble, painters grinding color, thinkers arguing beneath porticos. The Renaissance has found its lungs. In a crowded workshop near the Ponte Vecchio, a young apprentice cleans brushes. His name is Leonardo. His hands, stained with ochre and linseed oil, move as if the act of cleaning were a sacred ritual. Around him, laughter, sawdust, and the clang of hammers blend into music. He listens, he observes, he absorbs. The boy who once watched rivers now studies light, how it slides across faces, how it glows on copper and bone. He begins to see that light, not time, is the true painter. Donc, Chapter 1. The Workshop of Motion. Andrea del Verrocchio's workshop is chaos disguised as order. Assistants carve angels, mix pigments, polish armor for commissions. Leonardo watches every task with equal devotion. He sketches the curl of a horse's mane, the tilt of a soldier's wrist, the way fabric folds under weight. He learns to sculpt clay, to temper bronze, to make dyes from crushed lapis. He is apprenticed to everything, a student not of art, but of reality itself. Verrocchio, stern and exacting, notices the boy's intensity. "You look too long," he says once. Leonardo replies, "It is the only way to see." Under Verrocchio's discipline, Leonardo's fire finds form. Precision becomes worship. One afternoon, Verrocchio paints the baptism of Christ. He lets Leonardo complete the leftmost angel. The apprentice mixes lighter oils, layers thin glazes, until the figure breathes. When finished, the angel seems to move in the light. The master looks, nods once, and quietly steps away. The rumor says he never painted again. Whether myth or memory, the moment changes Leonardo. He has outgrown apprenticeship in skill but not in humility. He will spend the rest of his life chasing that same perfection, the illusion of movement captured in stillness. Chapter 2: The Anatomy of Wonder. Leonardo begins to roam the markets of Florence. He sketches everything: children playing, merchants haggling, beggars' hands, birds mid-flight. He follows butchers into their stalls, studying anatomy by candlelight. Flesh, he learns, is architecture, muscle, geometry. He fills pages with hearts, eyes, unborn infants. He notes how light refracts through the vitreous humor, how blood spirals when spilled. It horrifies some, fascinates others. To Leonardo, it is devotion. Each body another version of God's design. He writes backward, partly for secrecy, partly out of habit. Mirror writing keeps the curious from misreading half-born ideas. The notebooks grow. They are less records than dialogues, arguments between his hunger to know and his fear of never knowing enough. He writes, "The painter who has no doubts will achieve little." Doubt, he realizes, is the shadow cast by knowledge. Yente. Chapter 3: The Perfection Trap. The Medici family commissions portraits, altarpieces, mechanical devices. Leonardo accepts, sketches feverishly, then stops. Each idea blossoms into 10 new ones. Each attempt collapses under the weight of revision. Friends tease him for never finishing. He smiles and says, "I finish what is true." His perfectionism is both genius and wound. It keeps him pure, unwilling to compromise, but lonely. Patrons prefer deadlines to discovery. He misses payments, loses contracts. Still, he refuses haste. He begins the adoration of the Magi. Weeks become months. The figures swirl in motion, horses rear, angels lean. Yet something feels wrong. The world in the painting will not sit still. He abandons it. The unfinished work remains haunting, a symphony paused mid-breath. He writes in his journal, "Art is never finished, only abandoned." It will become prophecy for his entire life. Chapter 4: Rivals of Fire. Florence breeds brilliance like wildfire. Botticelli, Ghirlandaio, and a young sculptor named Michelangelo. Competition sharpens edges. Leonardo, older but still restless, feels the city tighten around him. Michelangelo mocks his unfinished projects. Leonardo counters with quiet contempt. Their rivalry becomes legend. two forms of perfection staring each other down. One carves fury from stone, the other dissolves divinity into light. Leonardo begins sketching flying machines, war engines, hydraulic pumps. His notebooks fill with diagrams of propellers and wings. The city sees a painter dabbling in nonsense. He sees a map of the future, but Florence grows small for him. He dreams of patrons who will fund invention without question. North in Milan, a duke is building an empire of art and war. Leonardo packs his sketches and walks away from the city of his youth. Now, Chapter 5. The Letter to the Duke. Arriving in Milan, Leonardo presents a letter to Ludovico Sforza, the Duke. It lists not paintings but weapons, designs for catapults, bridges, armored vehicles. Only at the end does he mention his art. He writes, "I can do all things that may belong to the art of peace as well as war." The Duke hires him, not as artist, as engineer. In Milan, Leonardo builds machines for festivals, constructs stage sets where actors descend from clouds, designs costumes lit by candle reflections. Each creation is a marriage of mechanics and imagination. He paints the Virgin of the rocks, experimenting with chiaroscuro, the science of shadow. Faces emerge from darkness, like thoughts from dreams. The world has never seen light used this way. He studies the physics of vision, noting how eyes dilate, how depth fades in mist. For him, seeing becomes sacred. Chapter 6. The Last Supper begins. When the Duke commissions a mural for the monastery of Santa Maria delle Grazie, Leonardo accepts. He chooses the moment not of communion, but of betrayal. The instant Christ tells his disciples that one of them will deny him. He arranges 13 figures across a long table. Each reacts differently. Shock, guilt, confusion. He paints not saints but men caught in time. To slow the drying process, he mixes tempera and oil. The technique gives him more control but dooms the painting's longevity. Within years, it begins to flake, yet even ruined, it glows. He has frozen the second between faith and fear. The perfection he chased as a child finally looks back at him. Oh, epilogue. The apprentice outgrows the light. In Milan, Leonardo becomes legend. Painter, engineer, architect, illusionist. But success never satisfies. He writes, "He who thinks little errs much." He dreams of flight again, of cities built in circles, of water that cleans itself. The Duke falls, war returns, Leonardo flees with his notebooks. Thousands of pages of drawings that whisper of the future. Florence will remember him as the man who painted light. History will remember him as the man who could not stop. Perfection is no longer a destination for him. It is a direction, and he will follow it until the end of Tin. End of Part 2. The Apprentice of Light. The Man Who Tamed Time. Part 4. The Weight of Genius. Ambesque. Prologue. The restless mind. Genius is heavy. It drags behind every breath like a chain of light. To be Leonardo da Vinci at the turn of the 16th century was to live inside that weight, the burden of knowing too much and finishing too little. Rome was swelling with power and corruption. Popes traded indulgences for gold. Painters vied for walls, and invention had become a form of war. Leonardo entered this city not as conqueror, but as a pilgrim of thought, carrying the sum of 50 years of observation in his satchels. He had built machines that never flew, drawn rivers that could never be mapped, sculpted horses that never stood, and yet he still rose every morning with the hunger of a novice. Tamed, Chapter 1. Rome and the Laboratory of Light. Leonardo's Rome was a place of contradiction. Holy men funding armies, scholars persecuted for curiosity, artists racing to capture eternity in plaster. Michelangelo painted ceilings, Raphael filled chapels with color, and in quiet rooms Leonardo dissected frogs and sketched the moon. He wrote, "While I thought I was learning to live, I have been learning to die." He meant it without sadness. To him, mortality was the final theorem, a mystery to solve. He designed devices to study optics, mirrors that could fold light upon itself, and lenses to magnify truth. His notebooks filled with diagrams of prisms, reflections, and rainbows. He began to understand light not as phenomenon, but as language, the world speaking in illumination and shadow. Every beam was information, every shadow an answer waiting for patience. Yet his patrons in Rome wanted spectacle, not study. He promised inventions, produced wonders too subtle to sell. They dismissed him. He remained gentle. "Those who take the most from time," he said, "are those who use it to understand." Chapter 2. The Mirror of Failure. Leonardo kept a notebook titled The Trattato della Pittura, a treatise on painting that would one day redefine the art. In it, he tried to catalogue everything he knew: anatomy, perspective, geometry, emotion, color. He wrote not for readers, but for himself, building a mirror to study his own mind. Every page became a reckoning. He realized that for every problem solved, 10 more appeared. He began to suspect that the closer one comes to truth, the more infinite it becomes. The sense of incompletion haunted him. He wrote to a friend, "We know more about movement of celestial bodies than we do about the soil beneath our feet." Failure for him was not defeat but dialogue. The weight of genius was not knowing, it was never being done. He understood that to see deeply was to never see enough. Now, Chapter 3. The Circle and the Cross. In his later years, Leonardo grew fascinated with geometry as theology. Circles became sacred, triangles divine, spirals the handwriting of creation. He drew the Vitruvian Man. Arms and legs extended within a square and a circle. Man as measure of the universe. The sketch became more famous than he could imagine. But to him it was not art, it was proof that proportion was harmony made visible. He believed that numbers could describe beauty, that God was not in cathedrals but in ratios. The painter, he wrote, competes with nature. Yet the competition exhausted him. He longed not to master nature, but to merge with it. When people asked about his faith, he said, "I believe in everything that moves." Movement had become his prayer. Chapter 4: The Burden of Mastery. By 60, his hands trembled. The precise lines that once carved light into canvas began to blur. His eyesight dimmed. He laughed about it, calling it nature's revenge for curiosity. He took apprentices but warned them that mastery is a weight, not a crown. The more you learn, he told them, the less you know. He still sketched, but slower now. His works from this period, St. John the Baptist, the Virgin and Child with St. Anne, carry a softness unknown to youth. Faces dissolve into shadow. Smiles whisper rather than declare. He had learned restraint. The fire of his early ambition had cooled into steady glow. He understood that perfection, like time, is not conquered by force. It yields only to attention. Chapter 5: The Letters of Age. In his notebooks, Leonardo began addressing time as if it were a friend. "My dear companion," he wrote, "you take what I love and replace it with wisdom. I am not sure which weighs more." He catalogued regrets, unfinished commissions, forgotten patrons, experiments abandoned, yet he found grace in the incompletion. He wrote, "As a day well spent brings happy sleep, so a life well used brings happy death." He no longer feared endings. He began to see the arc of his life as one of constant translation, from sight to sketch, from thought to motion, from wonder to peace. Chapter 6: The Silence of Clos Lucé. When King Francis I invited him to Amboise, Leonardo accepted. He traveled slowly, stopping to study bridges and rivers, the muscles of horses, the faces of travelers. At Clos Lucé, his small house near the royal palace, he unpacked his notebooks one last time. The French countryside reminded him of Tuscany. The same light, the same wind, through trees. He painted rarely, wrote constantly. He drew rivers that flowed into sky, mountains that turned into clouds. The boundaries between things no longer interested him. He called his studio La Stanza del Tempo, the room of time. The king visited often, listening to Leonardo's stories, his theories about motion and perspective. They became friends, the curious and the wise, the youth and the aged genius. One afternoon, while sketching the pattern of leaves, Leonardo said to the king, "All knowledge that does not lead to love is useless." Francis remembered that sentence until his own death. Chapter 7. The Weight Released. On May 2nd, 1519, Leonardo da Vinci closed his eyes for the last time. His notebooks surrounded him like loyal disciples. Legend says the king cradled his head as he died. He left thousands of pages behind. Equations, sketches, inventions, philosophies, most unread for centuries. The world would spend 500 years catching up to what his pen had already seen. He did not finish his works, he transcended them. The weight of genius fell away. In its place, the simplicity he had searched for all his life, the rhythm of breath, the flow of water, the light that bends but never breaks. Now, Epilogue, the gentle machine of time. Leonardo's name became legend, but legends forget that he was above all curious. He was not a prophet or magician, he was a man who never stopped looking. He taught us that perfection is not the absence of flaw, but the presence of patience. That time is not enemy but collaborator, that the act of seeing is sacred. Close your eyes now. Picture the old man at his desk, drawing circles that never close, smiling at the imperfection of his own line. You are allowed to rest. You are allowed to be unfinished.